Exodus chapter 2. We stopped last week at the end of verse 10 of chapter 2, and it was actually a very, very good place to stop, just in terms of the whole sequence of things, because there is a 40-year gap between verse 10 and verse 11 in Exodus chapter 2. Moses' the first 40 years of his life was broken up into three 40-year sections. The first 40 years of his life he spent in Egypt, the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and as Stephen declared, there learned in all of the wisdom of the Egyptians, mighty in words and deeds. He was a beautiful child, grew up in the midst of power, grew up highly educated, grew up with very not only learned, but the ability to communicate his learning. So here he is, and Josephus declares concerning him that Moses was in line to become Pharaoh himself. I mean, it's just like blue skies, nothing but blue sky. I mean, it just looks like and the future for him is just going to be unbelievably beautiful. He would be the envy of, in terms of advantage of most of the world if you were to look at that. And so that particular 40 years ends. So when we head into verse 11, he's 40 years old now. So he's not 16, he's not 26, he's 40 years old. And it came to pass in those days, so now we know him as an adult, fully an adult for sure, right? Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren, and notice that. He's talking about the Jews, and the Jews he refers to as his brethren. He went out to his brethren, and he looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he comes out there and he's looking around and all of the Hebrew slaves, and as he witnesses the oppression of the Egyptians upon the Jews and all, he takes, and as we're going to see in a moment, verse 12, he's forced to make a choice at this moment in his mind whether he's going to side with the Egyptians or whether he is going to side with the Jews, and he chooses to side with the Jews that he calls his brethren. Now, I don't know, and you can take this for what it's worth, but again, I go back to his mother, having him for those early years of his life before he was weaned and then delivered to Pharaoh's daughter. And all of the things that she must have endeavored to pour into his young life concerning his people, concerning the God of his people. She did whatever she did enough to cause him to realize that he, for all of the education of Egypt, for all of the access, the popularity, the advantage of Egypt, whatever she sowed into his life at a young age, when he reached 40 years old and was forced to choose between one or the other, without hesitation, he identifies with the Jews. I think it's a great encouragement to us as parents. Train up a child, the Bible says, in the way that he should go, and when he is older, he will not depart from it. So he makes a decision here now to identify and decide with his brethren. Now, this beating of the Hebrew by an Egyptian, I mean, without a doubt, it had to be that he looked at that and the Egyptian was beating him to the edge of death. I mean, life-threatening kind of way. So I think he looks at things, and he looks at this whole system that he's been raised in that's been so good to him, but now the light goes on and he realizes, I've been the recipient of all of this, but it has required the oppression of an entire group of people, in fact my people, to sustain this kind of life and privilege that I have. And he thinks nothing of jumping ship from the one camp to the other. And so he looked this way and he looked that way. He looked to the left and to the right, but because why? He knows he's about to do something wrong, right? You don't look left and right unless you know you're going to do something wrong. But he makes a big mistake here. Because when you're about to do something wrong, not enough to look left or right, is it? Got to look up. And he doesn't look up, and God's watching. And so he looks this way and that way. When he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and he hid him in the sand. That's murder. That's murder. We think of Moses. We esteem Moses very highly, and rightfully so. Ultimately, he's going to become described as the meekest man in all of the world. Now, he tells us that by the Spirit of God. But he changes. But he could have a hot temper in where he was. So he takes and he kills this man. Now, maybe even in God's eyes, God would look at what the Egyptian was doing, and it warranted that strength of judgment. But it wasn't Moses' place to do it. To take the law in his hands and to kill this Egyptian. But that's exactly what he proceeds to do. And he realizes, I'm sure, that though he's going to try and cover it up, he knows that he is crossing a threshold now. What he's about to do is something that's going to identify him permanently if it becomes known. So he kills the Egyptian, hides him in the sand. Now, this is interesting about Moses. Moses, we're going to see it over and over again. He hates oppression. He hates to see people oppressed. He hates might makes right. He hates the abuse of other people by those that are more powerful than them, the unjust abuse. So he rises up now at this point, and he is now going to, stand against the abuse of Egypt against the Jews. So he's kind of at a point right now in his life. He esteems himself called by God to be a deliverer of the Jews from the oppression of Egypt. And so now he's going to deliver them one Egyptian at a time. The problem is he's 40 years early. He's 40 years early. The 400 years that God had said that they would be in Egypt before God was going to bring them out, before they would be ready to then enter into the promised land, that 400 years has not passed yet. And impatience is a tremendous danger in our service to the Lord. So, but this is what he does. He thinks he's going to jump in, and they're going to recognize that he is now going to lead them out of this bondage and that kind of thing. So he makes a decision. I am with these people. I am with them. I am with their God. And in doing so, throws everything away. I mean, in one 30-second decision, he throws away all of his education for practical use in Egypt's empire. He throws away all of his advantage, all of his connections. He throws it all away. I mean, 90% of the world would look at him and say, you have made the stupidest decision that a person, you throw all of that away to identify with this persecuted, powerless people? That's ridiculous. And yet it wasn't ridiculous in God's eyes. It wasn't right what he did here, but God is going to redeem it. I'll tell you, when God calls you to do certain things, it's going to look stupid to about 90% of the world. I remember when we moved here. I'm thinking, this is no Moses thing. I'm lost perspective. Relax. But I remember when I was, quitting the phone company and all, and to come, it was in the middle of a recession. I tried to transfer over here and continue to, have a living in the whole deal. They were laying people off to 10 or 15 years seniority here in cable splicing. I couldn't get a job over here on things, and yet we had a strong sense that we were supposed to move. And I remember one person spoke about a job at the phone company, especially in a recession. They said, well, that's a job that'll be secure until hell freezes over. Probably not quite that long, but it was a very, very secure kind of job, and it just looked ridiculous to take that step at that time. But ridiculous to everyone but God. As small potatoes as all of this is, it's a pretty big deal to me. So He then went out, and the second day, the day after, and behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. So they're fighting with one another physically and all. And he said to the one who did the wrong. Now here, again, even when he's got 2 Jews, he looks at the oppressor, the one that's wrong in this. You're oppressing another person. He can't stand it. At all. And he said to him, "Why are you striking your companion?" And he said, doesn't give him an answer, probably because there's no good answer. But he says, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as an oppressor, just the way you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" And then Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." He says, "I'm cooked." Because if these 2 people know, and they know it on a conversational basis, then the word has spread. I didn't do so great a job of killing someone and hiding him in the sand. This news is going to spread all through the ranks of Egypt that I have done this. Now, in Acts chapter 7, when Stephen is giving his sermon to the religious leaders in that day, at this point we know from his sermon that Moses is really disappointed with the reaction of one of his Hebrew brother who rebukes him and basically rejects him as a deliverer at this point. Moses thought that the Jewish people would recognize him immediately as a deliverer and get on board with him. They would understand God has sent him, God has prepared him to do all of this, but they didn't understand. Now, having murdered an Egyptian, remember he is an adopted Hebrew, so that's not going to sit well in Egypt. When Pharaoh, this is kind of his step-grandfather, heard of this matter, hey, relationship is off. He sought to kill Moses. So he sends out whatever he's got to send out now. Find this guy and enact the death penalty against him. But Moses then fled from the face of Pharaoh. He flees out of Egypt, and he dwelt in the land of Midian. So he goes due east across the Sinai Peninsula, super arid. I mean, that is a desert, really rough area. And he makes his way all the way into what would be the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia today. Again, very, very much a desert area. He lands among the Midianites. The Midianites are blood relatives to the Jews because they were descendants of Abraham through Midian, one of the 6 sons that Abraham had through Keturah, his wife following the death of Sarah. So he comes and flees to Midian, and what does he do? He sat down by a well. That's kind of like an ancient Starbucks. When you would flee to another city or something, everybody gets thirsty every day. So everybody's going to come to that well that day. You're going to meet the whole city or someone representing every family in the city in the course of that day. So he comes there, and the place that a newcomer would come into a city would head right to the well, because there'd be other travelers, there'd be other shepherds, there'd be the citizens of the city. They would be coming and going. So if you're wanting to connect and try to find a place to stay and that kind of stuff, good to go to the well. So now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came and they drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. So their father has a flock of goats or sheep, probably goats. And they've gone through all of the effort of putting the skin down into the water, bringing it back up, and they fill the whole trough now with water for their sheep. They've done all of the labor. And then, after they've done all the work, before the flock can get watered, then the shepherds came. Oh, those men. They came and they drove the ladies away, but Moses stood up and helped them. And he watered the flock. He hates oppression. And it's not just in sticking up for oppression against the Jews. He hates it wherever he sees it. So he sees these guys, they come on the scene, might makes right. These are just a bunch of women. We can, force them out of the way and use their labor for ourselves. Moses doesn't look and say, well, they're Midianites. I don't care about Midianites. In his core, he cannot stand this kind of thing. And so he rises up and is fearsome enough to drive off these shepherds, and then proceeds to water the flock of the women that he is defending. Well, after all this happens, they came to Ruel, their father, and he said to them, "Wow, this is early. How is it that you have come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us." Now Moses looks very much like an Egyptian, probably a shaved head and all these kinds of things. So they don't know he's a Hebrew. "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." And this guy showed up, did a good thing for us. I mean, that's why everything happened so quickly. And so Ruel says to his 7 daughters, unmarried daughters, in essence, "What in the world are you doing leaving an eligible bachelor out by the well after he's done good to you? He's got good character, probably good looking and everything like that. And I'm looking for husbands for you. Go get them." Anyway, but this is how it's put in the Bible. So he said to his daughters, "And where is he?" See, it's a little calmer. "And why is that you have left the man? Don't leave an eligible bachelor out there. Call him that he may eat bread." And not for sure he's extending hospitality to him for the good thing that he's done there. But he's also, before this is over, Moses is going to be married into the family. So this father-in-law knows what it is that he's doing. So invite him, hospitality, let's bring him and invite him for dinner. And then Moses was content to live with the man, and he doesn't have any better offers. He's on the lam, and he's got to, get established somewhere. And so Ruel gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. And so they're married, and her name means little bird. And so we can be thankful that she wasn't like Big Eagle or Big Owl. There's going to be a problem in a couple of chapters, and it's a good thing that she's a little gal, because Moses might have ended up whipped on this whole thing. And they're married, and then she bore him a son. They called his name Gershom, which means a stranger here. And they named Gershom after Moses' physical circumstance. He's a stranger in Midian, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Now, it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt dies. And that does happen in the process of time, doesn't it? People do end up dying. So here is his kind of step-grandfather, the one that kind of put the sentence out for his death and all, and now this man dies. And so now it's going to be safe for Moses to return, and it clears the way for that. And then the children of Israel, they groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out. So all of the hard work, they've been enslaved in mass. They're doing these gigantic municipal slave projects for Egypt. It's been going on all of this time for 40 years. This has been going on while Moses has been in Midian. And there's a 40-year gap between verse 23 and then verse 1 of chapter 3. So 40 years, they've been in tremendous bondage. All the oppression has continued, and it's just pure misery. They groaned because of the bondage. They cried out. Their cry came up to God because of the bondage. Nobody can help us but God. I mean, there's just no way out of this miserable thing for our families and for us. And then notice, so God heard their groaning, and He remembered His covenant with Abraham and Isaac, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And so it doesn't mean that He had forgotten about them, but now it comes to the forefront of His mind. The word really means that He puts His focus firmly now on the promise that He had made to them to deliver them out of Egypt after 400 years, and not only deliver them out of Egypt, but into Canaan, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now He gives attention to them in a special way, and God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. So, all right, He looks at His watch. 400 years have gone by. It's time to get them out of here according to His purposes. And now what has He got to do? He's got to find a deliverer to lead them out. And that deliverer is going to be Moses. But Moses is out of the delivery game at this particular point in his life. And now Moses was tending, chapter 3, verse 1, the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert. So he's in the Sinai Peninsula area, came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And so here, again, 40-year gap between the time that Moses leaves Egypt, comes into Midian, and then he begins here and is going to have an encounter with God in chapter 3. It's very, very fascinating, to me with God in coming to Moses in this way, and Moses' condition that he's in when God comes to him. Moses is now 80 years old. Now, given the length of lifespan in those days, you're going to live to 120. So it would be comparable to somebody, one of us in this room, given our lifespans being about 46, 48 years of age. And after 40 years of being in Midian, what is he doing? He's a shepherd. And he is shepherding a flock out in the middle of the desert. And you know what's really weird about it? Is after 40 years, he doesn't even have his own flock. He doesn't even have his own flock. He's shepherding the flock of his father-in-law, and hasn't even in that years. He's no Jacob. Jacob would have had his father-in-law's flock, and 10 times the flock is before. But I'll tell you, he's lost all drive. He's lost all ambition. I mean, God is going to come to him now at a time where he has lost all desire to free the world of oppression. He has nothing, in his heart where earlier in his life, he had this great desire, to change the world and all of these kinds of things. And by the time God comes to him now at this point, he doesn't want a flock of his own. He doesn't want anything great. All he wants to do is just have a fair meal on a given day, eat and drink and be left alone and raise his family and then die one day and go to heaven. That's all he wants to do. Just quietly walk with God, be this thing, this anonymous thing out in the middle of the desert, and that's it. That's how he thinks the whole thing is going to end. Now you would look at this and these 40-year gaps and things, and you think God has really wasted 40 years in Moses' life. I mean, look at that. How long do you have to wander around the Sinai Peninsula? I've never wandered around the Sinai Peninsula. I just flew in a plane over it one time. That is a rough place to scratch out a living. Really rough. And so you look and say, what are you doing, God? I mean, he could be learning this or learning that and all of this, and you got him, out in the middle of that nothing, nowhere, and everything. Couldn't have had better training. It looks to the natural eye, everyone will look at it and say, it's a complete waste. What he's doing right. But he could not have had better training for what God was going to call him to do with the final 40 years of his life, because the final 40 years of his life are going to be spent shepherding the flock of God, the children of Israel, in that same area of the Sinai Peninsula. It's just... I remember one time a guy came to me, and many, many years ago, I don't use recent counseling appointments as examples. We're talking about a zillion years ago. But he came to me, and he had come from prison, and because of that being on his record, he could only get entry-level work to begin with. But he's a hard worker. And so he came in and he's just said, man, I'm just working so hard and everything like that, and they're just paying me minimum wage, and I know they're making tons of money off what I give them every day and the whole thing, and he's going into the whole thing and all. And it was the consequences of his sin and where he was and stuff, but he was just trying to talk to somebody about it a little bit. And I told him, I said, listen, and I'm always the hero of all my counseling sessions. So I got this one right, so I tell this story every once in a while. The rest of them, we just keep that top secret. But I told him, I said, what God is teaching you in your life is not about, the $3.75 or whatever it was an hour that you're earning there. If you're in God's will doing what He wants you to do and you're where He wants you to be, the big picture of what He's training you about has nothing to do with dollars and cents. What He's teaching you is a discipline you've never had in your life. To get someplace on time, to work hard the whole time that you're there, not to do it as a man pleaser, but to do it as unto the Lord, and to do the extra and this and this and this. There's a whole world of wealth that you are gaining by holding that job that only God knows that you're gaining for something that's going to serve you for what God is going to do next. So never look at where God's got you in some kind of thing. You had these big hopes, these big dreams, this thing, and then now I'm just grinding out my life in some kind of an anonymous place, and I'm happy to do it now, and it's all going to be wasted in terms of how God is going to use it. If we're in God's will, He's always doing something immediate in our life at that moment in time, but He's always working with His eye on the future. There's something being built in that years later perhaps we'll look back and say, I'm thankful for that. I get it now, Lord. I didn't, okay. I was even a little upset with you related to that. I didn't get that, but now I get it. Thank you for doing that. And Moses is in that kind of a place out there in that desert place, the back of the desert. I think in the Old King James it's the back side of the desert, and he's picking up the most important degree that he could pick up in life. That was his BSD degree, backside of the desert degree. And everyone's going to get one of those. You're going to serve the Lord on things. And so Moses' life spanned 120 years. First 40 years in Egypt. Second 40 years out in the desert, just shepherding his father-in-law's flock. The third section of 40 years, which now begins with this chapter, he's going to be used by God to deliver the children of Israel from the bondage of Egypt, and then endeavor to bring them to the promised land. He won't be able to take them in for reasons we'll talk about later. Someone has perfectly encapsulated, I think, Moses' life, this 40. He spent his first 40 years becoming something, his second 40 years becoming nothing, and then his third 40 years learning that God can do something with nothing. And so often that is the case on things. So he's out there in the middle of the desert. I mean, there's no iPod, there's no blueberries or raspberries or whatever those things, Bluetooths, or there's no video games, no TV, no what, or anything like that. It's pretty quiet existence. So he's out there, middle of this desert, all along, and unless he's Dr. Doolittle, there's no one to talk to. He's just got these sheep. And the angel of the Lord then appeared to him in a flame of fire. And this is none other than the Lord Himself, as we'll see, appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of the bush. So all of a sudden this bush, there's a fire in the bush. Now, that doesn't get him excited. That probably wasn't a rare thing out in that desert to see a bush on fire. But something did catch his eye. And so he sees it on fire, and so he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire. But the thing that got his eye is that the bush was not consumed. It just kept burning and burning and burning, and the bush isn't turning into a pile of ashes. Now, Moses, he'll see this every day, and so he said, I will now turn aside. He talks to himself. You can do that on the desert, 40 years. I will now turn aside and see this great sight. He said, oh, here's something you don't see every day. And why the bush does not burn. And so this is what catches his eye. And of course, the reason that the bush didn't burn is that it was the fire represented the presence of the Lord, and so it wasn't consumed. The fire is used as a symbol of God all through the Scriptures, because it illuminates, it purifies, it warms, it does all these kinds of things that God does. Now, he looks at the bush, and it's not being consumed. God does this through the bush for two things. Number one, to get Moses' attention. And then number two, as a manifestation of His presence there out in that desert to Moses. And the reason that the bush didn't burn, as we're going to see, is that it's a symbol of Israel. It's a symbol of Israel. The bush is a type of Israel in affliction. And why wasn't it destroyed? I mean, Israel ought to have been destroyed under the bondage of Egypt and all those things. The reason that it wasn't Israel and the Jews were not destroyed was the presence of God among them. The presence of God among them. I think additionally, all of this had to speak to Moses of his own life. I mean, 40 years earlier, he takes and he kills an Egyptian and tries to stop a fight between two Hebrews, and just trying to do this little thing, I mean, it left him as a pile of ashes. He is burnt out in, 2 days of ministry. He's completely wiped out, a heap of ashes and all. And yet here he looks at a fire that continues to burn and to burn and to burn. And it doesn't wipe out what it is that God is using now to burn in. And so he's got to be looking at this and say, how in the world does that kind of thing happen? What is the secret of that? And the secret of that is that whatever is fueled or empowered or indwelt by God, no matter how weak or feeble it is, even a bush in the desert will never end up an ash heap. And the secret he's about to learn personally, because he's a feeble bush. We're going to see that in just a moment. And he's about to blaze with unbelievable glory, with a power and a calling on his life that he just couldn't have dreamed about in his, and even in his greatest day. And he is going to be a fire in the midst of Egypt that all of Egypt is not going to be able to put out. But he's not going to end up as an ash heap as a result of it. And the difference between what will happen now and what happened 40 years earlier is the presence of God in his life. The timing is right, the calling is now, and God's presence is and enabling is fully upon him. So here is a bush, gets his attention, it's on fire, but it's not consumed. And so when the Lord saw that he had gotten Moses' attention, that he had turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." Now, how high do you think he jumped? I don't know. Does God clear his throat to prepare you for the fact that this bush is going to talk to you in a moment? Moses, whoa! That would flip me out. Anybody ever walk up behind you and you don't know somebody's going to talk on things? You think you're out, nobody within 100 miles of you in all directions. So you've got a couple unusual things here. Number one, you got a bush that isn't consumed. And now you got a bush that talks. And then third of all, you got a bush with intelligence because it knows his name. Now that's pretty weird. So God talks to him, and then Moses, though, he's dying for entertainment apparently, because he answers, "Here I am." So he's getting, what's going on here with the Lord speaking to him. And so not only does the bush speak, not only does the bush know his name, but the bush knows how to give commands. And so he said to him, "Do not draw near this place," the Lord said to Moses. "Take the sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground." Moses, take off your sandals here. The place that you're standing on is holy ground. What is holy ground? Anywhere God is. Anywhere God is, anywhere his presence is being manifest. You know what's interesting? Now, in that part of the world, in ancient times, you'd always take your shoes off when you went into a house. It was just a sign of respect in doing that. But it's interesting, when God later on, he takes all and describes all the clothing that the priests are supposed to wear in the service to the Lord at the tabernacle and then at the temple, mentions the hats and the robes and the sash and the everything. Nothing described for their feet. Nothing described for their feet. Very, very, very likely that the Hebrew priests, as they worshipped and served around those holy things in the temple, did it barefoot, just as an acknowledgement of the presence, a reinforcement to them of the presence of the Lord in the middle of what it is that they're doing. So, and moreover, God continues the conversation with Moses and said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." I am the God that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob worshipped. You've heard about them. And you've heard about me in terms. In other words, I'm the God that has a very long, faithful history with the Jews. And I'm the God that has given them a promise a prophecy that they would be 400 years in a foreign land and be afflicted in that land. But I'm the God who also gave the promise that you would be delivered out of that and into the land of Canaan. And I am the God who was faithful to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now I am going to be faithful to you and to the Hebrew children. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. I mean, there's just this reverence and respect for God. His immediate response is to cover his face. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Now, sometimes we're going to be in the middle of something that is so crushing, and it's so difficult, and it's so hard, and it's so unfair, and we can wonder, does God even know what I'm going through and what I'm in the middle of? And sometimes if He doesn't respond on a certain timetable, then we can start to doubt His involvement in our life, His care for us, and those kinds of things. The thing we have to be careful of related to that, from the Scriptures we know that He never takes His eye off of us. He's fully aware of what's going on in our life. But He's dealing with such a big picture. I want Him just to deal with a picture that's about this wide and about this high. And just whatever is best for me and all. You know, let's forget any kind of grandiose plans for reaching the world or impacting the world or this bigger picture that you have, God. I want it to happen this way and on this timetable in my life, or otherwise I'm going to begin to doubt you. But God doesn't work that way. And God, thankfully, He doesn't, I can't badger Him into, believing that in prayer. In Jesus' name, I'm telling you, like God gave us that in Jesus' name is like the big gun we point at Him. All right, it's come to this. In Jesus' name, I want this trial to end. So He disregards stuff like that. He's God, and He knows what's best. But what God is doing, when He delays to deliver us out of something like that, He's got a bigger plan. He is working off of information we don't know. And He knows that if He jumps in the way that I'm even asking Him to, will mar the whole thing. There is a timing issue to when God does what He does, because He's factoring in a lot of really big things. So we have to stay patient in the middle of these circumstances. No, they will come to an end, but there's a reason if they continue, and there's a timing issue in what God is doing. God is a Father. And for those of us who are parents, we would never want our child to needlessly be one moment longer in a miserable circumstance, life-threatening circumstance, than was necessary. We would deliver them immediately. And we are evil in comparison to Him as human parents. And so it would only be as we looked and said, no, there's a whole big picture here that I can't explain to you, and you need to stay there. It's going to work out really good. And that's how God is working in this whole thing. So I know, I've seen, I've heard, I know, verse 7. And so now the timing is right. I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. So He's going to do two things. He's going to take them out of one place. He's going to take them into another place. That's the promise He's making. Number one, I'm going to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. And number two, I'm going to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. That's dessert. That's good stuff. Milk and honey in those days, that was luxury kind of stuff. So he's talking about a land that's plentiful, it's abundant. You're not going to have to scratch out a living like in the Sinai Peninsula. I'm going to take them into a really good land, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I also have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. And come now therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh. You just think about how that hit Moses. Me? Boy, are you 40 years late. I will send, therefore, I've seen it all. I'm going to take them out of this land. I'm going to bring them into the new land. Moses is probably tracking with them. And then he gets the news. Now, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh. You're the one that I'm going to use, that I may bring my people and the children of Israel out of Egypt. Now, it's interesting. He declares there in verse 8 that he's going to bring them, the children of Israel, he's going to bring them out of Egypt, and he's going to take them into the promised land. But notice when he speaks to Moses in verse 10, he doesn't talk about taking them into the promised land. For Moses' part, Moses is just going to take them out of Egypt, because there's going to be a failure and a reason why he doesn't then take them into the promised land. But Moses said to God, and this is the first in a series of 5 excuses that Moses is going to give to God and let God know that he has the wrong guy. And Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So remember, he's in front of a burning bush here, and this conversation's going on. And he covers his face, and out of afraid to look on God, he takes his shoes off of his feet, all of this respect for God, but he doesn't think of anything about arguing with God. It's a funny combination. It can sometimes be in a vessel of the Lord. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? I mean, that's his immediate reaction is, who am I? Well, he's fairly underwhelmed here on this thing. I mean, you could expect a little bit of excitement from him. And he has zero excitement for this call that God is calling him to do. He doesn't see why it can work. All he can see is why it won't work. God, you have chosen the wrong person. There's no faith here. There's only pessimism. And so he's going to say, God, you got the wrong guy. I can't do this. And the interesting thing is that God does not accept the excuse and let him off of the hook. Moses is a different man from how he was 40 years earlier. 40 years earlier, it was like, all right, I am the king of the forest, and I'm ready to take over, and we'll get them out of here, and come on, guys, just follow me. And he's got all of this ambition, he's got all of this confidence and faith and education and talent and connections and all of these kinds of things. Now by the time God comes to him and says, all right, here we go now. We're going to move out on all of this. I mean, he has no more confidence. He has no more burning desire to change the world, to make a difference in the world and all. He has deliberately taken himself out of circulation. And again, all he wants to do is just eat a good meal every day, have a little time with his family, be left alone, walk with God, and then quietly pass off of the scene. God, if you had come 40 years earlier, I mean, I'd have jumped in. I mean, 40 years earlier, I had something to offer you. I mean, I had strength, I had desire, I had vision, I had confidence, I had all this. God, you are fully 40 years too late. You have got the wrong guy. Now, this is not something that's limited only to Moses when the Lord calls us to do something like this. Over and over again in the Scriptures, when you see God call men and women to serve Him, their first reaction is an unbelievable, really a paralyzing, Moses isn't alone, but oftentimes a paralyzing sense of their own inadequacy for what it is that God is calling them to do. And almost always the excuse is, whoa, wait a second. You better double check that address on that telegram, because I think you came to the wrong bush out here. I think you've got the wrong guy on this. And so and so he gives the excuse number one, who am I? Beautiful. The Lord's not going to accept Moses' excuses. And I think it's good for us to know that an overwhelming sense of our inadequacy for anything that God is calling us to do is not a legitimate excuse for not doing it. Everybody feels that. Everybody feels that. And if He accepted that as an excuse right out of the gate, nobody would be doing anything. And He would not have the ability to add His great power and what He brings to a calling on an individual life to guarantee their success. So if you sit here today and God is calling you to do something, you say, who am I? And I'm not going to do it. You got the wrong guy. I mean, if you'd called me, 5 years earlier or something like that, Lord, and all of that, but no way, I'm not going to do that. And surely you'll understand that no, God won't understand that. And He won't let that excuse hold. So what is God's answer to this, who am I? So He said, verse 12, I will certainly be with you. The promise of His presence. And that is the guarantee of success. Moses knows all about Egypt. He knows about its structure. He knows about its wealth. He knows about its power. He knows about its education. He knows about its military. He knows how big a deal it is going to be. He can only imagine how big of a deal it's going to be to try and get 2 to 3 million Jews, who are the lifeblood of the economy of Egypt, out of Egypt without everybody being slaughtered in a war. I mean, he just can't see how this thing can happen. And God just comes in and he says, you're going to be successful because I will be with you. I'm not saying you to do this alone, Moses. We're going to do this together. We're going to do it together on things. And I just want you to bring your little 5 loaves and your 2 little fishes along on this thing. And I'm going to bring everything that I am in on this thing. That's why we're going to be successful. Because of who I am and what I am. There's an old saying, 1 plus God is a majority. It's actually more one-sided than that. None plus God is a majority on things. So Moses looks at this thing and says, this is going to be impossible. There's no way I can do it. And God says, what's all this I stuff? I'm going to be with you. That's the guarantee of success. I think it's very, very interesting, too, in the light of the whole current obsession with, the self-esteem in our culture and all of that God doesn't do anything to try and nurture His self-esteem. Moses, come on. Let's get on, Casey's little train here at Disneyland again. You ever been on that one? Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it? It's a long line, though, when there's lines on that thing, because you only get so many people on it. And what's that train do? It starts to go up that hill, and what's it say? I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. Don't you love Walt? Just building us up and our self-esteem. I think I can, I think I can. And then it gets to the top, and then it goes over, and then I know I can, I know I can, I know I can, I know I can. So we got this whole kind of deal going. I'm not putting the thing down. I am, but I'm not meaning to put the thing down. But you got all this whole self-esteem. Come on, now think positive and all of these kinds of things. And listen, don't sell yourself short, Moses. Come here. Come here. I want you to say, I am a promise with a capital P. I happen to love that song, by the way, so I'm not trying to put that down either. But anyway, so what am I trying to do here on this? Listen, I got to tell you this. I mean, one of the greatest memories of my whole life is holding one of my granddaughters at Disneyland, and we're waiting in a particular area, and she sang that over and over to me, and I just kept prompting her to sing it again and again. It was so good. I like kids to say that. But God doesn't say to Moses, come on, Moses, don't sell yourself short. You've got something to offer here. You can do it, and all of this kind of thing. He just comes in, and our success in whatever God calls us to do, it doesn't depend on our self-esteem. We don't have, in fact, we shouldn't feel confident we can do anything apart from God. So it's not tied to how good I feel about myself. What I got to do is when God calls us to do something like that, you obey Him. I obey Him. And the whole thing, God's whole plan depends upon Him and just our simple obedience to Him. No little pep talk. God doesn't take Him by the hand and put His arm around his shoulder or anything. He just in essence says, you're going to be successful because of who I am. And then Moses said to God, indeed, when I came, and this will be a sign, verse 12, to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. You're going to be successful. You're going to come back here where you got these sheep and where I'm talking to you, and you're going to bring the whole group of the children of Israel out of the land, and we're going to meet here once again. That's how sure it is. And then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come, and this is his second excuse now. He's really dragging his feet. He said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? Then what do I say to them? And Moses is saying, I don't even know your name. So if I go to talk to the children of Israel and the leaders and say, listen, God wants us to clear out now, and He sent me to tell you this, and we're going to do these things, God, they're going to ask me what your name is. I don't even know what your name is. Now, they didn't ask Him that. We worry about a lot of things that never come to pass in our service to the Lord. So they're going to ask me what your name is. What's your name? I don't even know your name. And God said to Moses, and it's just one of the beautiful verses in the Bible, God said to Moses, I am who I am. And He said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And that's how God names Himself. I am that I am. It always just cracks me up. I mean, He is so sure of who He is. And the whole deal is, I am, is a sense, is not, I was and I'm going to be. It means, when He says, I am, He's saying, I am self-existent. I am in and of myself. I am not created. I am not made. I am not who I am and what I am because I've been created in any way. I am self-existent. I am in a category of one in all of everything, creation and beyond. But when He says, I am, He's also communicating that I live outside of the time space continuum kind of a deal. I don't live within the confines of time. I don't live where you live. I don't live in a place where there's a past and there's a present and there's a future. I felt all of the past and the present and the future all at the same time. That's who I am. And so he's talking about that fact. Lives outside of time. He's self-existent, uncreated, eternal, no beginning and no end. He exists in the eternal present tense. Now, it's beautiful because when He says, I am who I am, and He talks about, I tell the Israel, I am has sent me to you. Those words, I am, they come from four Hebrew letters, YHWH, also known as the Tetragrammaton, and that means four letters. And the problem is that we don't even know how to pronounce God's name anymore, how to pronounce this I am. When you read in the Bible and you see Lord, it's good to know, you see Lord in the Old Testament or the New Testament, and it's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. When you see it in all caps, it is this name that God uses for Himself. When you see it in capital L, lowercase O-R-D, then the word that is used for God typically in that setting is Adonai or Elohim. It is not Yahweh. So when you see it in all caps, it is God, referring to God in this way as Yahweh. Now, one of the problems with trying to understand what that name means today is that the ancient Hebrew alphabet didn't have any actual vowels. And so we don't know what vowels were used with the YHWH. And then later in Jewish history, at about the time of the Second Temple, the priests began to get kind of a little superstitious about the name, and they felt that there was supernatural power just associated with the name YHWH on the page and the vowels that were a part of it. And so they considered the name to be too sacred to even utter, and then ultimately too sacred to even write down on the page. And so it was replaced with Adonai, and then the copyists, when they would copy and they would come to that place where Yahweh was, they would no longer write Yahweh or whatever it actually was. They would just write in the name, because they felt His actual name was too holy to even write. Now, the problem with all of that is that pretty soon nobody was using His name, not in writing and not in speech. And so over time, they lost track of it. No record for what are the vowels associated with those other letters to know what His name means. So sometimes you'll see Him spoken of as Yahweh in a reference to I am. Sometimes Jehovah is used, but that's probably not as accurate as Yahweh as an expression for Him as His name here, capital L-O-R-D. And so He says, you tell them when you come to them, and if they ask you what my name is, that's my name that you should tell them. And then in verse 15, He said to Moses, you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you, and that is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. The God who your fathers served is now on the scene. Back, I'm going to be faithful to you. So that's what you're to say to them. You're also to go and to gather the elders of Israel, the leaders of them in their bondage, and say to them, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, appeared to me saying, I have surely visited you and seen what is done to you in Egypt. In other words, Moses is going to inform them, God has been compassionate. He has been watching what's going on. And I have said, I will bring you out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites to a land flowing with milk and honey. And then they will heed your voice. Important to remember this for next week. Is Moses, you're going to tell them about me, and you're going to tell them about my plan for their lives, and they're going to listen to you. You're wondering whether they're going to care about my name or they're going to drag their feet. Listen, they're eager to get out on things. They will listen to your voice, and you shall come, you and the elders of Israel, go to the king of Egypt, say to him, the Lord God of the Hebrews has met with us, and now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Make a simple request of Pharaoh. And then God said, but I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go. No, not even with a mighty hand. He tells Moses ahead of time, I want you to go and ask him to let my people go out for 3 days to worship me, but I'm telling you ahead of time, he's not going to let you go. So he's just preparing for failure. So that's the response you're going to get. So don't assume you're in my will on the basis of everything going, smoothly all the time. And so He's not going to let you go. And so I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in its midst. And after that, He will let you go. He thinks he's tough and he's going to play hardball, but he doesn't know I'm in quadruple A or whatever league God is in. And so I'm going to make sure that they do get out, even though He's going to resist you initially. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be when you go that you shall not go out empty-handed, but every woman shall ask of her neighbor, namely of those who dwells near her house, articles of silver, articles of gold and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. And so God informs them that not only am I going to deliver them, but I am going to make sure that they are repaid by Egypt for all of their long years of slave labor where they haven't been paid to Egypt. God had promised all that to Abraham hundreds of years earlier. Genesis chapter 15, He said, Abraham knows certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years, and also the nation whom they serve I will judge, and after they will come out with great possessions. And so that's going to be the case, and God promises it to be so. And so here is Moses. He has God's calling. He has God's commissioning. He has the guarantee of success, but he is not through making his excuses. And they will sound very familiar to many of us, and we'll continue to look at that, Lord willing, next week. Let's stand together, and if the worship team would come forward.